today's video, we're going to talk about the classification and characteristics of organisms. So in biology, we classify organisms based on this system. This can easily be remembered by the mnemonic King Philip came over for good soup. So the most broad classification is kingdom, and under kingdom you have phylum, then you have class, order, family, genus, and species. So in the current system that is the most widely accepted in today's day and age, we have 5 kingdoms. Okay, there are 5 kingdoms. There are other classifications and other systems of kingdoms. Right, there is a 2 kingdoms scheme which was by Linnaeus. Right, Linnaeus proposed a 2 kingdom scheme, which was animals and plants. And then the current scheme we follow was proposed by Whitaker, and the other two most widely known and accepted were proposed by Ruiz. He proposed 2 different types of systems. One is a 6 kingdom system, and the other is a 3 kingdom system. Under the three domain system. This is a domain system, not a kingdom. The 3 domains were eubacteria, archaea, and eukarya. So Whitaker and Voice, in their kingdom schemes, right, 5 kingdom and 6 kingdom, they both relied on these three, these 4 basic kingdoms, right? You have animal, plant, then you have fungus and protoctist. Now, where the difference comes is while Whitaker classified the 5th kingdom as prokaryotes, Voice went one step further and subclassified them uh, from prokaryote to eubacteria and archaebacteria. So, Whitaker proposed a prokaryote system, and Voice went one step further and subdivided prokaryote into eubacteria and archaebacteria. Right? So we're going to look at the characteristics of living organisms now that we've learned about the classification. Now there are 7 major classifications or signs of living organisms, 7 characteristics, if you will. And these 7 characteristics are, they're remembered by the mnemonic Mrs. Gren, right? So, Miss So it stands for M in the middle stands for movement, R stands for respiration, S stands for sensitivity, although you might also learn to call this irritability. Then you have G, which is growth, R again, which is reproduction, and E, which is excretion, and finally you have N, which is nutrition. Now, all living organisms must show all of these, all seven. Otherwise, they cannot be considered living. Even if they show six, they cannot be considered living. Right? Now, you might say that plants don't show movement. They do. Right? It doesn't have to be external movement. It doesn't have to be physical displacement. Right? It's not necessary that it's displacement. It's just movement in general. Right? It, it's an action. So when you come to defining this, movement is an action that by an organism or a part of an organism, right? That causes a change in the position or the place. Uh, Respiration is not to be confused with breathing. This is a very common error. Right? It's not the exchange of gases, but respiration is actually the breakdown of the food and the nutrient breakdown of nutrients to provide energy. Now, talking about sensitivity, it's the ability to detect and respond to changes in surroundings, right? So if it becomes hotter, maybe go to a cooler place, go to the shade, right? So not only must it detect, it must also respond. There must be some kind of response. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be the external environment. If there is some change internally, like maybe there is some parasite or pathogen, there is some response to that. Growth is also a very important definition. It's a permanent increase in dry mass. Okay. Now, why we say dry mass is because the human body is 70% water. So if you increase in the percentage of water, if you increase the amount of water, that doesn't make any sense. And it also is the permanent increase in size and dry mass, right? Both. So that's an important thing to note. Reproduction is, making more of the same kind of organism or making. Uh, However, it is important to note that it doesn't have to be the same species. Sometimes crossbreeding, like a horse and a donkey, they produce a mule, which is not the same species. However, it's still considered reproduction. However, it's not reproduction of fertile offspring. Right? A mule is infertile. Excretion is the removal of waste products, and nutrition is very simply put taking in, nutrients or materials for energy, growth, and development, and what else. Now, when you come to naming organisms, right, it's usually in this format: genus followed by species, right? And actually, no, it's genus followed by species. So there are a couple of rules. The first rule is that the first letter or of the genus must be capitalized. Uh, Secondly, the species must be lowercase at all times. Thirdly, if you can, it needs to be italicized. However, italicizing text, like actually writing it down is difficult. Or so you can underline the name to show significance, right? Uh, and additionally to that, right, the genus precedes the species. Now, the reason we use this uh, system of naming, which this is the scientific name, is because names can be confusing. So, if you take a robin, in India and in Britain, robin is very different. In India, they're mostly black and they're much smaller. And in Britain, they have the classic red breast, right? Uh, and they're more chubby, they're more round. So if an Indian scientist is talking to a British scientist and they are talking about robins, they might picture two very different birds. So the scientific name helps clear that. They use to avoid bias to any particular language. It is usually based off of Latin words. However, scientists that discover new species do have the liberty of naming it whatever they want. The species. However, the genus will remain same depending on whatever genus they belong to. So they usually do DNA sequencing and they look at the closest match, right? Uh, and then another tip is that the species is often descriptive. The name, especially if it is not named after a scientist. So you might have, Aquatilis as the species name, which means it lives in water, or perhaps even bulbosus, which means it has a bulb, and you have even Edulis, which is edible, and so this is some common names. So that's a tip. You can learn a little bit more about the bird, or uh, not the bird, but the organism in general. Right? And this system is called the binomial nomenclature. One thing to note is that um, two organisms from the same species, right? This is how you identify a species. They are able to reproduce and their offspring, right? and their offspring is also able to reproduce, right? So, two organisms that can reproduce and produce fertile offspring, or offspring that are also able to reproduce, are then in the same species. Two organisms may be able to reproduce while being in the same genus, but their offspring will not, right? Uh, so, horses and mules are part of the same genus, but they're not the same species. And the smallest natural group of organisms is the species.